Good morning and welcome back to Morning Cafe. This is TV47. My name is Fred Indemuli. We now want to take a look at some of the big discussions this week. Probably not on the dailies, but yes, we'll be looking at some of the discussions on the dailies. Remember that tomorrow we have the much anticipated ODM National Delegates Convention. We'll be taking a look at that later on. But first, we will be considering matters budgets. And with my panelists this morning, a privilege to be having in studio James Gakuya, MP Embakasi North. Karibu sana, Bwana Gakuya. And Hesbon Omolo, governance expert as well. Karibu sana. It's a pleasure to have you in studio. We're hoping that one more panelist will be joining us as we continue with this discussion. So, currently before Parliament is a supplementary budget that is set to increase 2025-2026 budget by about 317 billion shillings. Remember, it is only 3 months to the end of the financial year. Currently, Parliament is considering this amount. Some of the highlights: the President, or rather State House, the budget for State House is set to double from the initial 8 billion shillings or so, or thereabout, to about 17 billion shillings. Now, the Deputy President's office is asking for about 1.9 billion shillings. Now, questions do arise. How necessary are these expenditures? Are these state departments able to absorb the same within the 3 months to the end of the year? And let's start from there, because Bwana Gakuya, the main purpose of the National Assembly, or one of the main roles of the National Assembly, is budget making, Bwana Gakuya. So when it comes to, it's about 2 months before the next budget. This time around, you're already considering increasing this budget by about 317 billion. Of course, questions around the justification of such an increase. Are these the things you're considering now as a member of the National Assembly, that probably we are blowing up our debts unnecessarily?
Thank you, Idimori. Allow me to salute you as well when they are watching this morning show. Coming to the matter supplementary budget, it is true that supplementary budget, sometimes it's tradition that where you arise, there's particular gaps and there's a necessity of topping up. There arises what we call supplementary budget. And the only big question is that going to the needs, you cannot be able to explain how one State House is increasing its expenditure in such a rate. And you cannot even also imagine that it can be able to skip from the normal 8 billion to 17 billion Kenya shillings. This shows that there is an extraordinary expenditure within the State House, which is not well explained. And it's Parliament is discharged by duty to investigate and know exactly, because it is a duty to monitor and also get information. Why? Because we have a committee, which is a finance committee, which is supposed to already have gone through and knowing exactly what is making the State House to increase, also the Deputy President's office to increase such kind of expenditure within their spaces. It is unknown, but I hope facts will be attached with the needs. But I would say that it is not the high time that we could expect that 3 months to budget. Then we are expecting to have that a big demand of additional funds to those two offices. Those two offices, unless there is a mysterious misuse of fund, I could not be able to state why the expenditure is as high.
And you've been in Parliament for a while now. Is it normal for State House to double its budget, or any state department within one budget, financial year to double its budget?
I am saying it is extraordinary. It has not happened. It's only that we need to get that information to know exactly what is happening. There before, we knew that actually there are what we call State House renovations and new buildings, but I hope that those buildings are offer, and I don't think that the expenditure is heading to the new buildings.
All right.
And therefore, the big question is, what is this new cost? And this tells you there is extraordinary expenditure within two offices. But personally, I would say this money is money which are targeted or directed to politics.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the question, Bonomolo, is that even if at all there are renovations within State House, these are expenditures that were anticipated. And when the budget making process last year was going on, probably that should have been factored in. A doubling of the budget points to something extraordinary. Do you see any extraordinary need that State House would need to double its budget?
I think I would look at it slightly broader. You realize that under the current constitution, there is what we call Article 223. And Article 223 allows the CS Treasury to spend up to a maximum of 10% of the budget, subject to it being ratified by Parliament within, I think, 2 months period. So looking at the current supplementary budget, it's 316 billion, but 185 billion out of that has already been spent. So it is what needs to be ratified through Parliament. Now, the other bit, now there is what is going to education, what is going to agriculture, what is going to special circumstances such as what we've had with the floods and things like that. But still, the question is the allocation that goes to, that is State House, the Deputy President Office. And overall, if I look at how that budget then mirrors what we had initially, it means that our budget deficit now goes to above 5%. It's almost 6%, which is way above what was projected. And Mheshimiwa here, part of the UDA government, they had a manifesto that had projected that in 5 years' time, the budget deficit would be reducing to up to about 3.3%. So you realize that that has not been achieved. So yes, there could be justifying circumstances why additional expenditure is necessary. And I think education, higher education has gotten an additional allocation of 18 billion. I think there's also what has gone to health. There's what has gone to the very agriculture as well.
Yes.
But then, of course, there's what has gone to State House, which you've mentioned, which is double what it was originally planned.
And even from a governance perspective, the planning component of such an allocation, doubling within the same financial year.
Yeah, so I think what that then speaks to is that there's lack of proper planning and anticipation, because when the financial year begins, you already project how you want to run your government, what you want to do. If there are infrastructure projects you want to carry out, even within the State House, even if you are renovating the various state lodges, then you need to anticipate and plan and have that approved through Parliament. Unfortunately, then sometimes you will find certain expenses have been incurred, and then now they have to be processed through the supplementary budget. And I suspect that a good number could have already been spent, and it's a matter of just validating through what I would call the Article 223. But generally, if you look at the way this government has done its budget consistently, anywhere you see a supplementary budget, 1, 2, it means that your planning and budgeting process is broken. Because you cannot prepare a budget and within 1-2 months, you're already working on supplementary. Even with our counties, you see that happening a lot.
Same problem.
So I think it's about trying to be disciplined about the budget, trying to be disciplined about how you spend public resources, so that then you rally the entire country in the right direction.
When it comes to matters to do with reducing the spending by government, because the president has talked about this time and again, about austerity measures. But now it would appear, and you mentioned this, that the budget deficit has gone over 1 trillion shillings, about 1.14 trillion shillings, meaning that we will be forced probably to go again and look at possible lenders to fill that gap. So do you see that discussions around debt being totally disingenuous?
I think, and that's why I did mention the issue of what is our budget deficit. we are almost at 6%. It's 5 point, it will go to about 5.6, 5.7. I'm yet to get the exact number, but it's way above 5%. Now, the question then is, where is the money coming from? Because looking at the revenue side of things, and I did look at what the Control of Budget submitted for half-year performance of government in terms of revenue. On the ordinary taxes, we were doing 44% out of what I would call out of a possible 50% in terms of what we have been able to collect. So we had a 6% deficit. On the non-tax revenue, we were doing slightly better at 66%. So that was way above the halfway mark. So whether or not within the next 3 months, if we are to look at how the government will perform in terms of taxes, we will be able to first hit the target, but to surpass it, to then cover the kind of deficits we are expanding, is almost impossible. So the reality is we will have to borrow to be able to plug that gap. And that also then worsens our public debt situation. As it is today, we spend over 1.4 trillion on interest alone to service our public debt. That is our annual budget, and it's a first charge on our consolidated fund. So it is something that the government needs to look very, very seriously, take very seriously, and ensure that we walk the talk. I know traditionally, every election cycle, and this I've seen the budgets of every other government we've had, in the last 2 years to election. Because this is still not the election budget. Yes, it's not the election budget. Of course, part of it is there's a bit of preparation that you start having early, because 2020, this is just 2025, 2024, 25. The one that is coming, you should be seeing it in the next budget, is the one that will have even the heavier issues around how we plan for election. But as it is, there is a pattern where towards election, a lot of resources are, or rather the budget shoots up. We fail to meet targets that are planned. And you can only deduce one thing. For our budgets to escalate towards election, there must be election-related stuff around that space. So I think that is part of our culture we need to walk away from. And there's you mentioned Article 223 that allows the government to make spending even as they await the approval of Parliament. But that's the greatest concern now, that it would appear that Parliament has totally lost control over this budget-making process. That by simply invoking Article 223, the government could be able to spend money, probably even appropriate State House that double allocation that they need before Parliament approves. Don't you feel that your role as a member of the National Assembly in the budget-making process has been reduced to a simple rubber stamp?
In fact, the nature of how that particular clause of 223 is being invoked, it is invoked when most of the time when the House is on recess, when probably there is an election and the House is not in place. But when the House is in place, there's no any need of that's a misuse of what we call powers of the CS Treasury, because he needed to seek power or permission from the House when the House is sitting. I have not seen any time that the House was in a recess on that big time where there was a necessity of the CS to invoke that particular clause. However, it is there in law, and it is there in law just to make sure that 10% of the whole budget can be spent when the House is not in place. But all the same, whatever is being expended should be something that is explainable, because you cannot just invoke that particular clause for the purpose of taking money to unnecessary areas. And therefore, enough reasons has to be also tabled to support the same justification of invoking the same. I would say that as much as the budget making is concerned, sometimes the executive forces or uses what we call double power and also takes to their own pack the powers that are not directed theirs, because that when the House is in service, I don't think there's any necessary to move to that particular action. And if the committee for the Finance Committee and the Budget Committee feels that their powers have been bypassed by Treasury, they need to do something against the Treasury.
All right.
You just tame them, because that should not the way to go. Should not the way to go.
But Omolo, the other question is on the ability of state departments and ministries to absorb this kind of funds, because some allocations, yes, may have already been spent, but some of these allocations for agriculture and even some development, it's only 3 months to the end of the financial year. Don't you see a risk that some of this money, yes, will be allocated, but could actually be diverted to other things because of the inability of the state departments to actually absorb it for the right purpose?
I think maybe before I get there, just for context and clarification to Kenyans, Article 223 is a very well-meaning section of law, and it has conditions that have to be met before the funds are released and the controller of budget has to approve. And there must be something unforeseen. You must have exhausted what was initially planned around that space. And it was meant to deal with an emergency. For example, if this nation was attacked tomorrow and there's a war we have to be involved in, you would invoke it. If you have things such as the floods, we had emergency funds, but that has been surpassed. Or there's something as massive as what we had during the finance bill protest, and you are not able to appropriate funds ordinarily, then you have to think outside the box around that space. So it's a well-meaning article. Only that sometimes there's a thin line between what is unforeseen or what is probably poor budgeting. So I think those are the things we need to tighten around how that is applied. But ultimately, the power to determine that rests with Parliament. They still have to, because the law says within 2 months they have to bring, the CS has to bring that to Parliament for approval. If Parliament is in recess, as soon as it sits within the next 2 weeks, it sits, you need to take it there. So I think that is well there. But having said that, I looked at the Control of Budget's report on absorption of our budget, and on the development front, overall for all ministries, state departments, and parastatals, we had an absorption rate of 36% on the development front. But on the recurrent budget side, the absorption rate was slightly above 50%. So, of course, if the funds are allocated for purposes of development, and we have seen that the first half year, our absorption rate has been very, very slow, then there's a risk that part of it may not be spent, and therefore that money may end up not being utilized for the intended purpose, and therefore it defeats why you would put it in a budget. But the other thing is that for me as an expert around governance, sometimes those unintended delays and gaps or challenges in absorption become in direct ways through which the government avoids borrowing. So sometimes it's a good thing. Of course, if you have plans and you've already thought through your projects and you are unable to implement them, especially on the development front. Unfortunately, the development front is always the victim. Rarely do you find that recurrent budget is not spent for, especially the ones that touch on either the employees in government. Those ones will be utilized, even if it is last minute.
Per diems.
The per diems, those ones they try to utilize as much as possible. So I think it's about just being disciplined around our budget cycle. But the biggest pain I have as a Kenyan is that when I look at the most important sectors of our economy, education, healthcare, that if you combine all their budgets, they are a thin shadow of what we pay to just service public debt. Right. And I think if we are not careful, if public debt service interest alone is already double what our education budget is, and we are struggling to ensure that we have enough teachers, we have enough facilities for our schools and things like that, then we have a problem. Right. But again, and this is where sometimes I throw some very hard jabs at Parliament, is that Parliament is also captive in a way. Because while the executive have the desire to spend with the way they would want, the legislature And I know for good reasons. They have what we call NGCDF, which, in all fairness, has more visible projects you can see across the country than even the county governors are doing. But it has a catch. And that is why we have a public debt problem. The NGCDF is 2.5% of our budget. So for me as a legislator, if I was a member of parliament, a lower budgetary figure reduces my NGCDF allocation. And that is where now governance now comes in. And that is why sometimes it's important to ensure that the three arms of government operate interdependently but independently.
Yes.
That way then the incentive to bring in fiscal discipline is enhanced.
Okay. And that 317 billion shillings, once approved by Parliament, will take our total budget for the financial year 2025-2026 to 4.6 trillion shillings.
Yes.
It was initially 4.3 trillion around there. And I think that's probably what we were hoping to have as a new budget for 2026-2027.
Yes, so we've already hit that figure of the next financial year, which means you're almost certain that the 2026-27 financial year will actually go to 5 trillion.
Definitely.
Now, the question you ask yourself, where are we getting the money?
Right.
Are we plugging the gap or we are expanding it?
And this is one of the conversations we rarely have, the budget making process, how government spends money. The budget deficit for the year 2025-2026 now hits 1.14 trillion shillings. Where is that money coming from? Meanwhile, State House has doubled its annual budget from 8 to 17 billion, and the Deputy President's office is requiring an additional 1.9 billion shillings. Exactly what is this money for? And we have some headlines inside the pages. Very briefly because we need to take a break.
Oh, okay. I just want to say that, in fact, what suffers mostly, and when we have these extraordinary kind of additional budgets, is what we call development projects. Because you remember that Treasury delays to clear most part of the development fund. And what happens is that after expiry of the year, there's no carryover. So certain projects dies at that particular point.
And that money could be diverted to other things.
That money could be diverted to other things.
All right.
That's the problem. And that's where the control is not very, very clear.
All right. Yeah. Discussions around the budget making process. There's a supplementary budget currently before the National Assembly, and those are the anticipated consequences of the same. Let's take a break. When we come back, we move to what we're anticipating tomorrow, the ODM NDC. You're watching Morning Cafe.